In diretta da Taranto, Radio Medimex 2022. E siamo in diretta, siete all'ascolto di Radio Medimex, Carlo Chico in voce, Michele Casella, Dado Minervini. Abbiamo appena ascoltato un lungo talk molto interessante, fatto di parole ma anche di musica. Anche di suoni, sì, intorno alla figura di Ennio Morricone. Non soltanto appunto abbiamo avuto le parole di Calibro 35 di Enrico Gabrielli e di Tommaso Colliva, ma sì, anche il commento di Michele Riondino e ovviamente la moderazione di Francesco Costantini. Abbiamo scoperto moltissimo anche noi di Morricone, della sua arte e del suo incredibile talento, che era, per certi versi era quasi psichedelico nel modo in cui riusciva a trovare in suoni, in rumori delle fonti di ispirazione che poi sviluppava rendendole atmosfere sonore.
Parlando di psichedelia?
Certo, appunto, parlando di psichedelia e parlando di storie, no? Perché il Medimex è pienissimo di storie, pienissimo di racconti. I racconti vengono sviscerati non solo attraverso la musica ma anche attraverso le immagini. Abbiamo parlato già della mostra che attualmente è esposta al MarTA e che si può vedere, però la giornata di ieri, quella inaugurale, ci ha permesso proprio di conoscere meglio la storia dello studio che ha realizzato quelle copertine, quelle immagini che possiamo vedere al museo, e quindi è il momento anche di lanciarlo, di ascoltare.
Esatto, come dicevamo, abbiamo anticipato in questa seconda giornata di Radio Medimex, ci sono un sacco di curiosità veramente di passaggi incredibili che spiegano la creazione, l'invenzione di copertine che hanno fatto la storia della musica. Quindi...
Sì. E poi appunto vedere quelle copertine, capendo anche in che modo sono realizzate e vedere qual è la differenza tra la modalità analogica e la modalità digitale ci permette di aprire dei mondi che sono assolutamente interessanti, appunto l'icona e poi la parte artigianale. Quindi ora ci possiamo ascoltare l'intervista, possiamo ascoltare come Massarini è stato maestro di cerimonie insieme a Powell.
Infatti Massarini tra l'altro poteva andare ovviamente oltre, perché Aubrey Powell avrebbe continuato a raccontare un sacco di aneddoti, quindi poi hanno bloccato tutto perché è veramente tardi.
Sì. Quindi momento imperdibile e lo facciamo partire.
Allora, buongiorno e buon pomeriggio a tutti, grazie di essere venuti. Vi presento il signor Aubrey Powell. Thank you. Che è il nostro ospite d'onore di oggi, e devo dire quale ospite d'onore, nel senso che Powell porta con sé un abbondante pezzo di storia, naturalmente visuale, e ne parleremo e sentiamo un attimo cosa c'ha da raccontarci, nel senso che c'ha molte cose da raccontarci. Vediamo cosa riusciamo a fare in questi 3/4 d'ora in cui ci incontreremo. Quanti di voi non parlano inglese? Non parlano inglese? Parlate tutti inglese? Tu in prima fila? Vabbè, 1, 2, 3. Tutti gli altri parlano inglese? Cioè volete dire che io posso farla tutta in inglese? Come no? Parlate inglese? Did you understand what I said? I said you speak English. There were 3 people who said no, I don't speak English. So we can do it in English. No. Ok, però facciamo veramente una traduzione estremamente... Mi spiace che io do un po' la spalla, facciamo una traduzione estremamente sintetica perché sennò finiamo dopo cena, ok? Va bene? D'accordo? Chi vuole se la registra, così poi a casa se la risente con calma, se la fa tradurre dal nipote, perché in genere è così che funziona. Ok, so welcome to the MarTA Museum. Aubrey, very nice to meet you. Let's start from here, because the first thing you told me was that you loved so much the juxtaposition between the very modern and the very old, which is a very interesting combination of eras, designs, feelings, people, cultures. So, would you elaborate on this connection?
When I was asked to come and present pictures here, I was a little nervous that it wouldn't work. I have to admit that I thought, how can my pictures fit in with something which is very ancient? But when I arrived here, I was completely relieved. I was completely wrong. They work so well, as you said, a juxtaposition. It's the old and the new. And even though it's 1970s, most of these pictures are from, nevertheless, somehow there is an emotional attachment. When you look at some of the wonderful pieces that are in the museum here, and then you look at the very modern pictures that I took in the 1970s, there is definitely an emotional connection. It goes from an old style of creating craftsmanship to a new way of creating craftsmanship, because nearly all hypnosis work was done for real. Like the man on fire, he's really on fire. So I have a synergy with that.
Allora, gli ho chiesto, dato che era la prima cosa che mi ha detto quando ci siamo incontrati, come apprezzava questa giusta posizione di antico e moderno. Lui ha detto che all'inizio pensava che potesse anche non funzionare, ma quando è arrivato qui invece ha capito che funzionava, perché c'era un attaccamento emotivo fra i lavori di migliaia di anni fa e quelli di adesso, che è un attaccamento nella maniera di creare arte. Allora si creava in una certa maniera, adesso si crea in una maniera diversa. E quello che ha teso a sottolineare è che si crea davvero, cioè il lavoro dell'ipnosis non è fatto al computer, per capirci, i computer non esistevano allora, quindi sono cose vere, cioè sono magari camere oscure, sono tutte lavorazioni, sono manufatti, diciamo così, e anche l'uomo che brucia in Wish You Were Here è davvero un uomo che brucia. So let's go back to the old times. First of all, you put together with Storm Thorgerson a company which is called Hipgnosis, which was kind of a wordplay, no, between being hip and being gnostic. So being hip and knowing stuff. Was that the beginning of the word, or it just happened like that, or you just liked the sound and then you elaborated on the meaning?
No, I was living with Storm Thorgerson, my partner, in an apartment in London, and we were living with Syd Barrett, who was the co-founder of Pink Floyd.
Nice threesome. Wild times.
Yeah, wild times.
Yes.
And Syd Barrett was what we call a wordsmith. He was very clever with words. And one day we walked to our apartment on this beautiful, pristine white door. The name Hipgnosis was written. And Storm and I were trying to think of a name for our company. And we were very upset somebody had written on the door, and there was standing Syd with a pen. We knew it was him. And we were angry. And then Storm said, you know what, that is a great name for a company. Hip, cool, gnostic, wise. Let's call our name Hipgnosis. And that was it.
La nascita della parola Hipgnosis, che è un gioco di parole come ipnotismo ma con una G in più, l'hanno scoperto un giorno tornando a casa. Abitavano in questo appartamento con una porta bianca e l'hanno trovato scritto sopra. Abitavano in tre, c'era anche Syd Barrett, e lui dice che Syd Barrett aveva una particolare capacità con le parole. E immediatamente loro si sono un po' arrabbiati perché qualcuno gli aveva scritto sulla porta bianca, poi si sono resi conto che probabilmente era stato invece Barrett e il suo partner, che era Storm Thorgerson, che ci ha lasciato nel 2013, ha detto questa è una ottima parola per una azienda. You started off, both you and Storm started off, if I'm not wrong, as a students of film. Quindi avete cominciato come studenti di cinematografia?
Storm was a student at the Royal College of Art, and in 1968 there was a lot of student upheaval in England and in France and
in Italy.
Europe. Yeah. And I was working with the BBC as a scenic designer, young scenic designer, and I wanted to be behind the camera, not in front of it, working in scenic design. So I asked Storm, how can I do this? He said, so, come to the Royal College of Art with me because it's chaos. Nobody knows who is ruling the college, the students or the principals. He said, enroll in the college. So I went, I enrolled in the photographic college, and I had the best free 6 months of education in darkroom, photography, lighting, everything. And I wasn't even a member of the college. And this was the start for Storm and me. I realized I wanted to be a photographer.
All'inizio sì, studiavo cinematografia, ma a un certo punto Storm, che studiava al Royal College, gli ha detto vieni da noi, era il 68, c'erano moti studenteschi ovunque, anche in Italia, anche in Francia e anche in Inghilterra, e in quel momento il Royal College aveva un po' perso, come dire, cioè non sapeva chi lo governava, no? Se gli studenti o il corpo invece dei insegnanti, e allora è andato, si è iscritto, anche se non ne faceva parte, e ha fatto i 6 mesi di educazione professionale in camera oscura con tutte le tecniche fotografiche, ha detto i 6 mesi migliori della mia vita per quanto riguarda la formazione. And then you meet Pink Floyd, or you knew already Sid, and is this yours, by the way?
This one.
First
one there.
This one?
No, this one here.
No, okay. But no.
That was it, yes.
That was already yours?
Yes, but that was not the first album cover.
Okay. I know. Ok, no, scusate, curiosavo fra le copertine che ho portato c'era anche il primo disco di Sid Barrett e stavano in 3 in casa, quindi evidentemente Sid introduces you to the other members of the band.
We were all from Cambridge. This was our hometown, and Pink Floyd started in Cambridge. They weren't called Pink Floyd then, and we were all friends. And as young people, aged 15, 16, we played guitars. I didn't play very well, so I was out of the band, but we were best friends, and when we all moved to London and Pink Floyd started, they asked, why don't you do the album cover, have a go, because they wanted to control their own creative destiny, like the music. They didn't want to be controlled by the record company, so we did the first album cover, Saucer Full of Secrets, and it was very successful for them and us.
Allora si incontrano, vengono tutti da Cambridge, che è una città universitaria inglese vicino a Londra, e i Pink Floyd chiedono se posso fare una copertina per loro, perché volevano avere il controllo sia della parte musicale ma anche della parte visuale, e this is the first cover, which is a cover that I always loved, because you could see a lot of things inside, no? And there are a lot of things actually. There's also, you tell me where is Doctor Strange?
Doctor Strange is here.
Okay.
So with this cover, Pink Floyd at this time were known as an underground band. They had a following which was not particularly popular, but they played what they call space rock, psychedelic space rock, influenced by drugs, particularly LSD. And so when we came up with the idea for the cover, we wanted all kinds of imagery, like alchemical bottles, Doctor Strange from the Marvel comics, these are chemical signs here, and astrological signs, and this sort of summed up the general atmosphere that surrounded Pink Floyd at that time. And of course, Syd Barrett was with the band, but he took too much LSD at this time and burnt his brains out, and he left. And this was the only album cover which he is a part of, in that sense, the record.
Allora, è una copertina nella quale ci sono moltissime immagini dentro. Doctor Strange, non so se qualcuno lo conosce di voi, dei Marvel Comics. C'è una foto col fisheye dei Pink Floyd, ci sono dei pianeti, insomma è un po', it's a little bit like science fiction, no? Un po' come sì. Io ho sempre amato questa copertina, che l'ho trovata sempre come dire, veramente identificativa della musica dei Pink Floyd, which I was saying that I always love this cover because I think it's really identifies with the music of Pink Floyd, which was, I suppose, really your magical quality in all the years that you stayed with Pink Floyd. I have a feeling that the work was done starting from the music and not just starting because it was a beautiful picture or a concept or something like this, and identified very much. Ho sempre pensato che le loro copertine si identificassero molto con la musica di Pink Floyd, che è una cosa importante però, perché spesso le copertine sono fatte perché sono delle belle foto, dei bei concetti, perché viene bene, e invece loro cercavano proprio di mettere il senso della loro musica all'interno delle copertine, cioè essere in qualche maniera la porta d'ingresso per la loro musica. E it's like the covers were like the entrance, the doorway to get into the music. Was that the concept? Was that what you were looking for?
100%. In those days, of course, the album cover was very important because there weren't so many TV shows or newspapers about music. So the album cover became like a signpost to what the band was doing and how they wanted to be interpreted visually. And so we, with Pink Floyd, always heard the music first. We always heard the lyrics first. We would spend time in Abbey Road with them, and we were close. We were all best friends. And then we would go away and come up with ideas and come back to them and show them. And always there was one that they said, "This is us." So it was a very close, and still is now. I'm the creative director of Pink Floyd now, and we have a very, very close synergy.
Erano tempi in cui non c'erano tante riviste musicali, televisione, per cui le copertine erano un po', come dire, il biglietto da visita, erano l'immagine del gruppo. Dalla copertina tu capivi che genere di musica si faceva, ed è il processo che lui ha portato avanti tutti questi anni. È ancora direttore artistico dei dischi dei Pink Floyd, quindi è ancora il materiale che esce adesso, e questa idea è sempre stata quella che loro hanno seguito. In the book of I brought with me the book of Mind Over Matter, the Storm Thorgerson, of your partner, and there is something that says about this cover which I think is true. I'll say it in Italian first. Abbondano le sovrapposizioni a sottolineare il venir meno dei confini fra le diverse situazioni e la rimozione dei vecchi limiti, nel mentre ogni evento o sensazione si fonde con l'altra, con effetti a cascata che evocano quelli della musica dei Pink Floyd. I'll try to say it in English, but you probably know this book. Sovrapposizione, various layers abound to underline the fact that borders between diverse situations fall and are removed. Also the limits are removed. In the meantime, that every event or sensation mixes with the other with effects that evoke the music of Pink Floyd, which is what we were saying.
Yeah, I think the thing about Pink Floyd in the early days, they were an experimental band and very avant-garde at the time, and they were multi-layered, and so the structure of the music was often improvised, and I think this cover represents that improvisation, this multi-layer, this multi-structure. And then of course it went on more to be far more structured later on with The Wall and Wish You Were Here and Dark Side of the Moon. But in the beginning, it was very improvised, almost amateur, like us. We were amateur too.
That's a nice thing. That's a nice thing to remember. Partiamo da questo. Lui diceva che come la band, come i Pink Floyd erano amatoriali all'inizio, lo erano anche loro, amatoriali nel senso che stavano sperimentando, che stavano cercando nuove strade, e quindi la copertina cattura questo momento. Let me say one more thing about covers. I think that you said that a record in some way represented the music that was inside, no? The band and the music that was inside. My elaboration on this was that holding the covers under your arm when you were walking around was your identity card. You could tell from far away, okay, he's cool. I mean, he's got the right records, he's not. It was, you know?
100%. I mean, when you walked into somebody's apartment and you saw Bob Dylan, John Baez, Donovan, you knew they were a folk music person. When you walked in there, you saw Pink Floyd, Soft Machine, you knew they were on some weird acid trip somewhere. And likewise, if you saw some blues records, it was an identifying thing.
Sure.
And as you rightly say, if I was walking down the street from the record store with an album under my arm, you knew what kind of person that was straight away. It was definitely a social identity. Mm-hmm. And this is a culturally important part of album cover history.
È una parte importante credo che abbiate capito la domanda, era una parte importante della storia delle copertine, il fatto che ci si può identificare, che tu quando quello che gli ho detto io era la nostra carta d'identità. Quando camminavi con un pacco di copertine sotto il braccio, o quando entravi in una casa e vedevi una serie di copertine, capivi chi era quell'altra persona senza neanche parlarci, senza neanche chiederlo, già sapevi più o meno se ti potevi fidare, se potevi essere un amico o se era meglio stare lontani. Ok, after that comes another cover, which I know that you sent a few covers to discuss, but I brought a couple more.
Of course.
C'è questa copertina. Let me tell you one thing first of all. In 1971, this is 1971, 70, something like that?
71.
Yeah, 71. Okay, in 1971, when I was working on the radio, my first program, Per Voi Giovani, in the afternoon, 2 hours in the afternoon, they were voted, this record was voted most popular record of the time. So, incredible, eh? Il disco, quando facevamo Per Voi Giovani, fecero il referendum, no? Sapete che erano i tempi delle liste, no? Cioè si faceva i migliori di questi, i migliori di quelli. Migliore disco dell'anno, Amma Gamma, disco uno dal vivo, uno in studio e con questa copertina che io trovo bellissima. È quel gioco che poi quando sono arrivati i chroma key si faceva, no? Che c'era questa scansione, ma qui c'è un gioco molto diverso, perché ogni volta, in ogni fotografia, scusate ve lo giro, in ogni fotografia che è all'interno della fotografia, che è all'interno dell'altra fotografia, c'è una persona diversa che si mette in una posizione diversa. I was describing the fact that it seems like just a multiplication, but there is a position, but the guy is always in a different position, so there's always one on top. How did this come along?
It was political.
È stata politica in what
because
sense?
David Gilmour was the best looking.
Ok, in quel senso, stava politica interna, politica del gruppo.
I wish I could say there was something more deep about this, but it's not. So each time.
Allora, David Gilmour è il più bello da mettere davanti, ok.
We put them in different positions. But I think what is most important about this, there's two things I want to say. One is this idea comes from a Dutch cocoa tin called Drost. And in the Storm and I saw this cocoa tin, and it's a picture of a woman holding a cocoa tin who's a picture of a woman holding a cocoa tin. And we saw that and we thought this would make an interesting idea for Pink Floyd. Storm always said there's nothing new, and to plagiarize other people is totally acceptable. What is also interesting about
David Bowie said that geniuses copy, the other ones imitate.
Absolutely right, and we were certainly guilty of that. But what's really interesting about this cover is here, this was a photograph of Gigi, and they took it out. And this must
they took it out?
Yes.
Oh.
And on the original it is, but not on this album cover.
This is American. You know, the Americans like to censor things.
They took it out because they were frightened of litigation.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I mean pathetic, but
it seems like a promotional more than litigation.
And also, it's a special buy. It contains 2 albums. And also, you know what Umagoma is? Umagoma is making love.
Oh yeah.
It was a Cambridge expression.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah.
A few years later, I find out. Okay.
Yeah, there you go. Everybody must understand.
Life is for learning, as my master says. Allora, la copertina viene da un'idea di una scatola di cacao che loro videro, in cui c'era una persona che teneva una scatola, che all'interno aveva una persona che teneva una scatola, e da quello hanno pensato che potesse essere una buona idea. Qui c'era la copertina di Gigi. Where is Gigi? A musical? Musical. C'era un musical americano che è stato areografato via in questa edizione, che è la mia edizione, l'edizione americana. Okay. At that point, more or less, Hipgnosis has become a brand. You start working. What was your feeling then? I mean, was it a day-by-day sort of invention, or did you start thinking about what could be both a career in designing and also the importance of rock music and hence the covers?
I would like to say you're right, but it's not correct. Storm and I worked 14 hours a day, 7 days a week, designing photography and inventing new ways of thinking about things. We realized that From the moment we saw Sgt. Pepper by Peter Blake, with album covers you could think laterally. You don't have to have the obvious. So we developed a way of thinking like that. And often, working with bands, the album cover that we designed had nothing to do with the name of the band, the lyrics, the music, or the title of the album. They were just ideas. And there were ideas that we wanted to do, and that's what made us different, because we were not confined to any rules that the normal record companies were. So we were renegades, we were the Wild West.
Wild Ones. A partire dalla copertina dei Beatles, guardando Sgt. Pepper, hanno capito lui e Storm che fondamentalmente che si poteva fare tutto, quindi hanno un pensiero laterale, che si poteva andare in qualsiasi direzione si volesse andare, e in particolare loro lavoravano 14 ore al giorno, 7 giorni a settimana, e quindi insomma lavoravano duro cercando di trovare soluzioni nuove, e questa era la cosa che gli interessava, e la cosa che poi loro facevano con le varie copertine delle varie band, cioè spesso non avevano a che fare né col nome della band, né col titolo, né con la musica dentro, ma con un'idea, un concetto che a loro piaceva, e da questo punto di vista si consideravano un po' dei rinnegati, direbbe Bennato, cioè delle persone che erano fuori del pensiero comune. But with Pink Floyd on the other side, but with Pink Floyd instead you were looking for the identification. So some bands yes, some bands no. Was that the concept?
That is correct. I think because we were very close to Pink Floyd, obviously we had an insight into particularly Roger Waters, where his lyrics were going. And when you look at things like Dark Side of the Moon or let's say Wish You Were Here, we already knew what the songs were about. And this was a huge advantage for thinking ideas.
E con i Pink Floyd loro erano molto vicini, quindi le idee che Roger Waters, soprattutto a livello testuale, metteva nelle canzoni, loro le conoscevano prima che il disco uscisse, quindi questo li facilitava nel trovare le soluzioni per i vari album. Ok, allora, e questa credo che la conoscete tutti. Just to tell you the atmosphere. Okay. To tell you the atmosphere of this record when it came out in Italy, Paolo Giaccio, which was the main person behind the radio show Per Voi Giovani, we put it on air. He put it on air. I was still practicing. I came in the year after that. He put it on air and he said, "Close your eyes, listen to this piece of music." We broadcasted 20 minutes in a row. Those were the times for radio, I suppose in England as well, but just compare it with radio now. Close your eyes and then write us and tell us what you felt. So it was a sort of an experiment, in sort of a psycho experiment, but of synchronicity, of Italian synchronicity all over, because we're national of course, so all over Italy. They received a huge amount of letters, of course, saying everything
yes.
and the opposite of everything.
Yes.
But those were the times. That's the importance that Pink Floyd had with the Italian public. Just to give you a sensation of what.
That's amazing to have asked that, actually, because I'm sure Pink Floyd, sometimes, especially in these early times, it was love them or hate them. Because they were moving away from the traditional, what I called the space rock before, into a more sophisticated sound, and they were working with Ron Gleason on this, which was a big piece of almost classical music, and this was not what Pink Floyd fans were expecting. So they were being brave, they were breaking away, and this cover is part of that.
Allora, io ho ricordato, non so se avete capito, che Per Voi Giovani, Paolo Giaccio, che salutiamo e ringraziamo ancora oggi, fece questo esperimento di, non so se qualcuno di voi era quel giorno all'ascolto di Per Voi Giovani, tu c'eri, e lo trasmisero per intero e chiesero alla gente, tu hai mandato la lettera? No, she was one of the people listening to the radio show that day. e ha chiesto di mandare una lettera con le sensazioni che si sentivano sui Pink Floyd. Questo gliel'ho detto a Paul, gliel'ho detto anche per fargli capire quanto il pubblico italiano amasse i Pink Floyd e quanti Pink Floyd sono stati importanti culturalmente in quel momento, how important Pink Floyd were culturally in that moment. E lui mi ha detto che questo è un album molto coraggioso, perché loro si stavano allontanando da quello che poteva essere definito un rock spaziale all'inizio, e sono andati in una direzione assolutamente inaspettata, con un compositore di musica classica, Ron Giesen, a cui hanno affidato praticamente l'orchestrazione e la costruzione di tutto questo disco, e quindi era un disco molto, molto fuori da qualsiasi canone, molto inaspettato, molto coraggioso, come era molto, molto particolare anche la fotografia della copertina. So, since it's so particular, you can explain it.
Okay.
Allora spiegacela questa copertina.
So Storm Thorgerson and I were very influenced by surrealist painters like René Magritte or Salvador Dali, and the films of people like Louis Buñuel, but also people like Marcel Duchamp, the Dadaist movement. We were very keen on that meaningless art, but at the same time meaning something which was very, very ordinary. So we were sitting talking one day about this album and what we should do. And I remember Storm and I were talking, and he suddenly said, let's do something very mundane, very ordinary. And we talked about what we could do, you know. And then he said,
You heard the music already, or
Yes.
you had the idea?
yeah. And we had no idea because the music was so difficult. I was in Abbey Road Studios, and even the Pink Floyd didn't know what they were doing, so for them to translate it to us was impossible. There's a funny story about that, about how the record company guy came to listen to the music, and they played him another piece of music from another album under the table, and he walked out of the studio. Anyway, so Storm said to me, what about a cow? I said, a cow? He said, yeah. So we went to a field not far from London and photographed this cow. She's called Lulu Bell III.
Yes.
And
She's famous.
yeah, and we did a blow-up picture. I took it to Abbey Road Studios with Storm and said, that's the cover. And they all went, yeah, fantastic, that's the cover. But then Storm said, no name on the cover and no title. And they said, absolutely. So when we took this picture into the record company, the veins of the man's neck stood out with anger and rage, because they couldn't believe this was going to be the new Pink Floyd album cover, and Pink Floyd were on the cusp of being very big. But Pink Floyd had total control and belief in us, so they said, that's the cover.
Allora, stavano facendo questo disco molto strano, e tutti quanti si chiedevano che genere di copertina potesse avere questo album che mischiava il rock con la musica classica, e allora così strano che quando è venuto un uomo della casa discografica gli hanno suonato un'altra cosa e gli ha chiesto cosa state facendo, e gli hanno messo un altro pezzo di musica, e allora hanno pensato, per un disco così complesso, così particolare, una copertina molto semplice. Allora Storm gli ha detto andiamo in un campo e fotografiamo una mucca, e lui ha detto una mucca, e poi hanno fatto questa foto. Lei si chiama Lulu Bell III, c'ha un nome come tutte le mucche, e hanno fatto questa foto, l'hanno riportata indietro. I Pink Floyd sono stati subito d'accordo nel fatto che fosse una copertina fantastica, e Storm ha detto, quando hanno parlato poi con la casa discografica, ha detto però niente nome sulla copertina e niente titolo, e lui ha detto, il dirigente della casa discografica mentre parlava gli si sono gonfiate dalla rabbia le vene sul collo. Però, but this is part of the mystique, and this is part of the magic of this record, and I would enlarge the idea, and I would say that this is part of the mystique of Hipgnosis.
100%.
Yeah.
100%. This album cover represents a kind of tipping point for Hipgnosis, because in those days when you went to a record store there were 10,000 albums to choose from, and this was so different.
No cows.
No cows. And this was so different. And David Gilmour always says about this cover in a way the cover was more successful than the album because everybody knew the cover, not so many people knew the album.
Sì, è una copertina che quando entravi in un negozio di dischi era assolutamente unica e Gilmour ha fatto una battuta dicendo la gente conosce più la copertina del disco. By the way, let me tell you that there is a very very good Italian tribute band called Pink Floyd Legend.
Okay.
They put on shows which are magnificent and they will be playing in Rome July, late July, maybe early August or something like that, with Ron Giesing.
No, fantastic,
yes.
incredible.
Sì. Per qualcuno di voi che ama davvero i Pink Floyd deve farsi il viaggio a Roma, adesso non mi ricordo la data se è luglio-agosto, ma i Pink Floyd Legend, che sono una grande tribute band dei Pink Floyd ma con orchestra, cioè mettono su uno spettacolo veramente assolutamente straordinario, suoneranno il disco per intero con Ron Giesing, che è insomma un bel evento. If you wish to come, you can be my guest in
Thank
Rome.
you. You never know.
You never know. Allora, and then I suppose that we can jump to the big guy, no?
The big guy, yeah.
Allora, if that made a name for Hipgnosis, because it certainly demonstrated that you were far out in the way you perceived cover art, this is probably what made Pink Floyd. Well, this is probably it's been on the charts in America or England, whatever, for like 30 years, 40 years.
Yes, it still sells 7,000 copies of the vinyl a week.
Sì, vende ancora 7.000 copie a settimana del vinile. È il disco che è stato più a lungo nelle classifiche americane e inglesi, credo oltre 200 settimane, quindi che 200 settimane, molto di più in realtà, 28 anni credo in classifica nei primi 200 ed è il momento in cui now I see. No, I was reading about this thing, the connection. Okay, now I see it. Ed è il momento, se quello è stato il tipping point, cioè se quello è stato il momento in cui la loro azienda improvvisamente è diventata qualcosa di molto riconoscibile, di molto famoso e di molto originale, questo è probabilmente il disco che non solo ha reso i Pink Floyd, ma che probabilmente viene ricordato anche come il capolavoro di Hipgnosis. So it made the Pink Floyd and it made Hipgnosis one of the biggest, I would say, design agencies in the world. A very simple idea.
Very simple. I went to Abbey Road Studios with Storm and to talk about the album cover, and Pink Floyd, Rick Wright, the keyboard player, he said, "Oh, I'm fed up with your surrealist ideas." We were very depressed. So Storm and I left. He said, how about coming up with something like a chocolate box, something very simple, black with
Who said this?
Richard Wright, the keyboard player. So we went back to the studio. We were a bit depressed, and anyway, a couple of weeks later I was looking through a book which was about physics and the refraction of light, and Storm went, "I've got it. A pyramid with a refraction of light going through it, which goes through the whole album." And so I could draw quite well, so I sketched it out on a piece of paper. There was no sophistication in those days.
And it's upstairs, right?
Yeah.
That's the sketch which is upstairs.
Yes. And I went to see the band in Abbey Road, and we said, "How about that?" And they all went, "That's it. That's the one. That's it. That's." And we had some other ideas. They said, "No, we don't want any of this rubbish. We want this one. That's it." And that was it. And anyway, I could never imagine that this simple image would become so iconic. And I often ask myself, this album sold 65 million. If another band had this image and it sold 1,000, would it still be iconic? I don't think so. So I have to thank Pink Floyd, and they have to thank me.
Allora, avete sentito, no? E fra l'altro, Richard Wright, che era l'organista, pianista, tastierista, gli ha detto però non facciamo anche questa volta una cosa così complessa, facciamo una cosa molto semplice, come una scatola di cioccolatini, una cosa... E loro sono tornati in studio un po' depressi, un po' intristiti da questa cosa, dicendo ma chissà che cosa ci possiamo inventare. Poi lui un giorno stava scorrendo un libro di fisica e ha visto l'idea del prisma, no? Della luce bianca che passa attraverso un prisma e si scinde in tutto lo spettro delle luci, dei colori. E allora ha detto ok, questa può essere la cosa giusta, l'hanno portata alla band, la band è stata entusiasta, hanno scartato tutte le altre ipotesi di copertina e poi la battuta finale era: ha venduto 65 milioni di copie, è diventata iconica, chissà se sarebbe stata iconica anche se ne avesse vendute solo 1000, probabilmente no, quindi grazie ai Pink Floyd, e i Pink Floyd ringraziano Hipgnosis. That said, why? You probably wondered all your life, saying why this was so strong as an image or not. Perché secondo te era così forte?
The reason it's so strong as an image for Pink Floyd is because at the time it was 100% the image of Pink Floyd. I explained before that Pink Floyd in these days had an incredible light show. They were the first band in the world really to concentrate on big light shows and big circular screens behind the stage illustrating the music. It was what Roger Waters called electric theatre. And so you never saw the band. Often David Gilmour, he used to have his back to the audience. They were always dressed in black. You couldn't see them, and consequently black was the color of the staging. And yet they had these incredible light shows. So when they saw this, they felt this was exactly what they were trying to portray at the time. And it just was right time, right place.
Allora, lui ha detto il motivo per cui è piaciuta così tanto ai Pink Floyd, il motivo per cui è così forte come identificazione con la band era perché loro suonavano dal vivo, ma praticamente loro erano anonimi, si vestivano di nero, alcuni erano addirittura girati al palco, insomma era una situazione di buio però illuminata dal loro light show, da quello che Roger Waters chiamava electric theatre, quindi il teatro elettrico. E quindi rappresenta perfettamente la sintesi dei Pink Floyd, soprattutto dei Pink Floyd dal vivo, cioè da una parte il nero e dall'altra parte invece i colori che rappresentavano il loro show. Was it met immediately by success? È piaciuto subito? Ha avuto subito successo?
Yes, immediately. It changed the fortunes of Hipgnosis because 1973 was an incredible year for us because we did Houses of the Holy for Led Zeppelin, we did The Dark Side of the Room, we did Venus and Mars for Paul McCartney, we did Genesis, we did so many big bands in that year, and this album cover made our career go from here to there. I mean, stratospheric, and suddenly everybody wanted to work with Hipgnosis. So yes, immediately it had an impact, and thank you Pink Floyd.
Sì, ha avuto un impatto immediato, è stato un anno molto particolare perché hanno fatto House of the Holy dei Led Zeppelin, hanno fatto What Genesis?
I think it was Lamb Lies Down on Broadway.
Lamb Lies Down on Broadway, quindi sì, quello è l'anno 73. E quindi improvvisamente le loro fortune hanno decollato verticalmente. E noi, guarda caso,
yes.
And by chance, just...
No, it's a good one.
E questo è appunto In Through the Outdoor dei Led Zeppelin. What's so particular about this album, the cover?
What was interesting about this was that I had an idea to go to New Orleans and study the absinthe bars.
Yeah.
Absinthe, you know the drink, absinthe. It's it makes you
sober,
blind. It makes you blind.
Assenzio.
L'Assenzio?
Yeah.
Sì, I don't drink anyway.
It can make you blind anyway.
No, I do other stuff.
And what we wanted to do was to have a bar exactly like an absinthe bar in New Orleans, and have 6 people in the bar, and it was the view from each person, and to have 6 different album covers. So when you bought the album cover, you didn't know which one you bought, but then you could buy another 5 if you wanted. So Peter Grant, who managed Led Zeppelin, who was this enormous man, I mean a gangster, huge man, and he was always very kind to me, but he was a very heavy bully.
Tough one.
Tough, yeah. He said to me, Hipgnosis, you are so expensive. He said, I could sell Led Zeppelin in a brown paper bag. So I said, why don't you? So he said, okay, we will. So we put the 6 album covers in a grocery bag like this, and then you really didn't know which one you got. And it was phenomenal success. And funnily enough, there's just been a new film about Hipgnosis made by Anton Corbijn, and he interviewed Jimmy Page, and he said, you know what? The record cover was more expensive than the record to make.
Allora, parte tutto dall'Assenzio e loro volevano ricreare una situazione in un bar a New Orleans in cui ci fossero 6 persone dentro, fosse un bar di Assenzio in qualche maniera, e allora hanno fatto 6 copertine diverse. E il manager di Pink Floyd, l'enorme e tostissimo Peter Grant, gli ha detto fate, sprecate un sacco di soldi, io potrei vendere un disco di Pink Floyd se lo mettete in un sacchetto del droghiere, insomma dell'alimentari, e infatti questa è la versione, this is the Peter Grant version. Is it true that if you put this in water it changes?
The inside, if you have
the inside, no, there is no inside.
No. Okay, so the other trick we did, which again was so expensive, was it was like a child's coloring book. And we didn't tell anybody, but if you touched it with water or you put your glass of whiskey on it, it changed color. But we never told anybody, and then suddenly people started to complain. I put my glass on there and it's gone green and blue and red. Of course, you know.
They didn't get it, e all'interno c'era una costosissima copertina interiore sulla quale se passavi il dito bagnato di saliva o ci mettevi qualcosa di bagnato cambiava colore, e la gente però non lo sapeva, quindi si lamentava e gli diceva che cambiava colore la copertina. Curiosamente un nostro caro amico, a dear friend of ours who came by, brought along this as well. Okay. Now this I know very well. I definitely know very well. Because we were the ones that broke Genesis in Italy.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's okay. And this was questo è naturalmente, vabbè, non è che devo presentarla a qualcuno. C'è qualcuno che non sa che cos'è questo? Può alzare la mano? Okay, I asked if anybody didn't know what this was could raise their hand. Okay, you noticed. How did this come along, and how did you work? How was the work? Okay, you at this point you work with Peter Gabriel, I suppose. No, he didn't know anything about it.
This was the first time we worked with Peter Gabriel, and
but you did work with Peter on this album.
Yes.
Constant, yes, okay.
Yeah, but
so the question was, until this moment you had worked with Pink Floyd, which were very different band than Genesis for 1,000 reasons that we don't need to underline here. How was it to work, how was it from Roger Waters and David Gilmour and going to Peter Gabriel and...
Oh my God. A nightmare.
Oh really?
I love Peter Gabriel, we are best friends. But he's a man who can't make a decision. And when we start...
Especially when to put the new album out, as we all know.
Yeah.
When are you going out? December.
Yeah.
Without saying the year.
Yeah. He has a house in London he's had for 30 years. He never touched it because he can't make his mind up. Anyway, so I met with Peter and he got on very well with Storm because they like to argue for hours. Anyway, but Peter said, I'm going to write you a letter about The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway, and then you can work out what to do for the image. A week later, we get a 9-page letter, tiny little writing.
I know his writing.
And so Storm and I are reading this letter from Peter. This guy Real, his hero, he does this. And Storm said, oh my God, how are we going to do this? So then we decided to create like a comic. You know, so each panel represents some of the journey of Real, who is the hero, this guy here. It was a very surrealistic story. And so, first of all, I drew it as a maquette. I took it to Peter and I said, how about this? He went, first time he made a decision in his life. I like that, so that's it.
Allora gli ho chiesto la differenza del lavorare con Pink Floyd e con Genesis. Tu dici che ama Peter Gabriel, ma che è un uomo che non riesce mai a decidersi, cosa sulla quale sono d'accordo, e che quindi gli hanno chiesto darci un briefing, darci un'idea di quello che tu vorresti. Gli ha scritto una lettera di 9 pagine con la scrittura, non so se avete mai visto la scrittura di Peter Gabriel, piccolissima, minutissima, e per cui faticosamente sono arrivati invece a questa idea, che era un po' l'idea di fare il viaggio di Rael, o di Real, sapete, no, il gioco di parole lì, reale, Rael, come fosse un fumetto. E quindi se guardate, infatti, exactly like a comic, se lo vedete è esattamente come i fumetti, no? Sapete quando passano da un disegno all'altro disegno, connettendo i due disegni, e quindi questo è il... These were pictures that were taken from Hipgnosis?
Yes, yeah, everything is Hipgnosis, and these pictures are further illustration of the story, and the story is all written by Peter on the inside. And actually it was the end of Peter's relationship with Genesis, because he insisted on writing all the lyrics, controlling the music completely, and after this album they couldn't work together again.
Sì. Did you ever see anche le illustrazioni interne sono fatte da loro, raccontano la storia, dentro c'è la storia raccontata da Peter, sappiamo tutti quanti, credo che sia parte della storia italiana, credo che la insegnino anche a scuola, come l'ultimo album che Peter Gabriel fa con i Genesis, e per vari motivi, perché lui voleva scrivere tutti i testi e quindi ha rallentato di molto il processo, perché stava nel mezzo di questo problema della prima The World's the First Baby Born, insomma è tutta la storia dell'abbandono dei Genesis. And did you ever see the show, the live show?
Yes.
Did you like it?
Yes, it was good. The thing about Genesis and Peter was always dressing up in different costumes and playing different characters and parts. And this was what made Genesis such an interesting band, completely different from how they are now without him. And his synergy with Hipgnosis was great, because he liked to play with surrealist ideas with himself. And that went on to his solo albums, Scratch, Melt and Car, where we did portraits of him which were very disfigured.
They were all Hipgnosis.
They were all Hipgnosis, and he loved that kind of...
They're wonderful covers.
Yeah.
The Scratch one is great. Also, the Face Melt is great.
Yes.
Yeah, that genius. Una relazione che poi è andata avanti con gli album solisti di Peter, ha fatto quello Scratch, quello in cui si scioglie la faccia. Which is the third one?
Melt, Scratch, Car.
Car è il primo, sì, il primo. Questo me l'avevi anche dato. Ok, torniamo in zona. The same period, more or less. Storm mi ha chiesto, Aubrey mi ha chiesto di portare alcune copertine. I didn't have the 10cc album covers.
This is my...
I'm really sorry. And we asked all of Taranto. There were posters on the wall. Who has a 10cc cover? Bring it this afternoon. And nobody has a 10cc cover.
You know,
sorry, not that popular.
They wrote a lyric called "Life is just a minestrone," so probably upset the
like a minestrone.
But this is one of my most important and favorite album covers.
Okay, so I brought along questo. Allora, sono i Nice. Chi non conosce i Nice ha chiaramente meno della nostra età. Chi non conosce i Nice erano il primo gruppo di Keith Emerson, trio, 4 persone prima, poi trio, basso, batteria e tastiere. Sono il gruppo col quale lui è diventato famoso, prima naturalmente di fare gli Emerson, Lake and Palmer. I Nice hanno fatto 4 dischi, 5 dischi, non sono mai stati una band popolarissima, ma era una band molto molto interessante che ha aperto la strada poi naturalmente a Emerson, Lake and Palmer, e Aubrey dice che è una delle sue copertine preferite. Why?
We were asked to create this album cover, and Storm came into the studio one day and said, I had a dream last night of red footballs in the desert. Can you draw it? So I drew it. We took it to Keith Emerson. He said, 100%, this is the music for Elegy. So I went to see the record company and I said, okay, this is going to be the album cover. And the guy said, oh, where are you going to shoot this? Down on the south coast of England, somewhere where there's some sand? I said, no, the Sahara Desert. And the guy nearly fell through the floor. He said, oh, it's so expensive. I said, no, that's what we're doing. This is how we're doing it. So Storm and I went to Morocco. We drove to the Sahara and I took 60 red footballs, but 1 bicycle pump, and the bicycle pump does not blow up 60 red footballs. So we had to get a truck stop in the middle of the desert to blow the footballs up, and then this is the picture. And this is the most important picture for Hipgnosis, because we realized we could do surrealist land art for an album cover. And this was a turning point for us at 1971, very early time, that we could present anything to do with an album cover, any image we wanted, and that could be accepted. So it was a very important piece for us.
La storia è che è un sogno di Storm che dice: ho visto dei palloni da calcio nel deserto, lui l'ha disegnata e sono andati alla compagnia, all'etichetta discografica e le hanno detto questa sarà la copertina. Hanno detto va bene, dove la fate? In qualche parte in Inghilterra. E hanno detto no, noi andiamo nel deserto del Sahara. E ho detto ma è costosissimo. Dice è quello che dobbiamo fare, punto. E lui dice che è molto importante, è stata molto importante per Hipgnosis questa copertina, perché da una copertina per fare una copertina hanno fatto land art, no? Arte sul territorio, arte materica, e si sono anche resi conto che in quel momento si sono resi conto anche che a questo punto avrebbero potuto fare veramente qualsiasi cosa. Was it expensive?
Yes.
Were you expensive? Oh, by the way.
God. Okay. So this new movie that's coming out called Squaring the Circle by Anton Corbijn, he asked Jimmy Page, expensive, but he also asked Noel Gallagher. He said, Noel Gallagher from Oasis, why you never had an album cover by Hipgnosis? He said, they're so fucking expensive.
No, gli ho chiesto visto e considerato appunto che andavano facendo fotografie nel deserto, se erano molto costose, se Hipgnosis era molto costosa, e lui mi ha risposto dicendo una battuta di questo nuovo film di Anton Corbijn, che naturalmente conoscete, insomma, fotografo e cineasta di altissimo livello, soprattutto con i Depeche Mode. C'è un'intervista con Noel Gallagher, il quale dice perché non avete mai fatto una copertina con Hipgnosis? Dice cazzo che costano carissimi.
This is a perfect example, because this album cover in 1975 cost $50,000. In 1975 that would be $500,000 now. I spent days, weeks looking for the right location and this and that and the man on fire. And in those days, because the business was awash with money because of the amount of album sales, tens of millions, when I said I want to do this, it's going to cost that, nobody said no. Nobody ever said no.
Allora, questo è un buon esempio, ha detto, perché questa copertina costava tantissimo, ha dovuto scegliere la location, tante altre cose, ma si vendevano talmente tanti dischi che anche spendere mezzo milione di adesso, cioè mezzo miliardo di allora, per una copertina era accettato, perché c'era un business sotto che lo permetteva. As you notice, I did not tear away the blue part, and it's still inside, and I want to keep it that way. But maybe you can explain why it was. This This record is about the absence, right? I mean, the concept behind this record is absence, so you can explain everything from the black cover to the Man on Fire.
Storm and I went to Abbey Road Studios to listen to the album, and also Roger Waters gave us the lyrics to the album. And it was called Wish You Were Here, and of course, which is about absence. We wish you were with us. And one, it's talking about Syd Barrett, who had completely lost his brain to LSD. But also it was about a madness and also the insincerity of the record business, because at this time, in 1975, all people who worked in the record business wore suits and ties and shiny shoes and carried briefcases, and they didn't give a shit about the artist. All they cared about was the money.
That early?
Yeah.
That early?
Yeah.
I thought that was more like a thing of the 80s. No, already?
No, it was... Exactly, yes. And also Have a Cigar, which of course is very much about record business, but there's one very important line in that, which is where Roger says on this album, by the way, which one is Pink?
Certo, of course. Yeah, which is something that did happen, actually.
100% happened, yeah. So the record company executives didn't even know that there wasn't a guy called Pink. They assumed there was a guy called Pink Floyd. I mean, this is how out of touch they were.
Ok, let me translate it. Allora, un disco sull'assenza, ed è l'assenza naturalmente di Syd Barrett, ma è anche un disco sull'assenza di contatto fra la musica e il business che si stava creando sotto. Ha detto che in quel periodo i dirigenti discografici cominciarono a essere vestiti, no, cravatta, scarpe lucide, 24 ore, si era perso quel senso iniziale, e c'è una frase che insomma conoscete, immagino, si chiama di Pink Floyd, nella quale dice ed è uno della compagnia discografica che dice a loro, a proposito, chi di voi è Pink, che rende l'idea di come ormai fosse diventato tutto un business. So why the dark cover? Perché la copertina scura e perché l'uomo in fiamme?
Yeah, so I just explained the inside cover first. On the front cover we have exactly a businessman shaking hands with another businessman, but one of them is being burnt in the deal. This was a direct reflection of the record industry. Young bands were being ripped off, including Pink Floyd, by the record companies. So anyway, Storm went to Abbey Road Studios with some drawings for the inside cover, and they all listened, and then they gave him a round of applause and said, okay, do it. And I remember I said to Storm, how are we going to do this guy on fire? He said, go to Hollywood and get a stuntman and set him on fire. But then, just to add something more, Storm said, wish you were here means also that you want to get into your album. So if we cover it in black plastic, it's a bit like a Christmas present. You want to get inside to see what's there, but you don't know what's inside. And the band went, good idea, this will really upset the record company. That was it.
Allora, la storia la copertina interna, no, sono due persone che si danno la mano, vestite bene, vestite eleganti, e rappresentano, e uno dei due però va a fuoco. In inglese si dice burnt, vuol dire bruciato, in italiano non la usiamo molto come espressione, ma insomma quando vieni fregato in qualche maniera. E allora questo era, come dire, il riferimento all'industria discografica, no? In cui c'era sempre qualcuno che veniva fregato. E poi la copertina esterna invece rappresenta un po' un involucro come fosse un regalo di Natale, che tu lo prendi ma non sai che cosa c'è dentro, e Waters ha detto fantastico, così faremo veramente incazzare la compagnia discografica. And then there's this image of two steel persons, or two robots shaking hands, which you put as a sticker on, so there isn't some kind of reference to something else. Poi c'è lo sticker con le due mani dei robot che si stringono la mano.
This was a gesture to the record company, because they said we have to have something that says Pink Floyd, so we designed the sticker. But also the idea of two robot hands is that they have no emotion. There's no reality, no human point of contact. And this was how Roger Waters regarded the record company. No human contact.
E invece lo sticker l'ha voluto mettere sopra l'etichetta discografica per avere qualcosa che comunque richiamasse i Pink Floyd, però rappresenta anche due mani di due robot metallici, quindi che si stringono la mano in assenza totale di contatto con la persona umana, quindi con sentimenti umani, e questa era una riflessione di come loro si sentivano nei confronti dell'industria discografica. Let me ask you something, let's elaborate a moment on this, because all artists have had tough relationships with, just think of Prince. All artists have had tough relationships with the record companies, but I feel that there was something more than this. I feel like Roger, I suppose mainly Roger, wanted to, I don't know, to make a point, to get a point across of being really diverse from the business that they were doing.
The thing with Roger Waters, he's a very cerebral individual, very well educated, and is a deep thinker. He doesn't write about love. He doesn't write about relationships like that. All his work is absolutely dedicated to the human condition, good and bad, and consequently everything he does is done with a great deal of sincerity and anger. He's an activist, a political activist. So whatever he does is going to resonate and have a great deal of emotional content and a delivery of aggression. And that's how he is.
Allora, Roger Waters non scrive canzoni sui sentimenti normali, scrive più delle canzoni sulle condizioni umane e tutto ciò che ne consegue, e Aubrey dice che è da considerare alla pari con un attivista politico, insomma, che tutte le canzoni che lui fa sono dei messaggi precisi su questo tema. We won't go into all the process of shooting this photograph. No, because it's a long story. But why was it chosen the Battersea Park? And non entriamo nel merito di come hanno fatto questa foto, 2 giorni di fila, il maiale che è volato via lo sono andati a recuperare in campagna, l'hanno riportato indietro, eccetera, eccetera, eccetera. Credo 4-6 fotografi che scattavano da tutti i punti di vista cercando l'immagine giusta, cosa che si vede se andate alla mostra, ci sono punti di vista diversi. Ma perché, why Discover, why Battersea Park and why the Pig?
Okay, very simple. So Pink Floyd by this time were huge. 1977, success of Dark Side of the Moon, wish you were here. They were playing in America to 95,000 people a night. But Roger felt there was a little tiny stage and there were little tiny people on it. So he said, I have to expand this electric theatre, this theatrical thing. So he had a pig made to fly over the audience. And you know, Pig in America was a cop. So this was an antagonistic thing to the cops. So when he came to me and he said, okay, so I have this pig, but look out of my window, can you see Battersea Power Station? I said, yes. He said, I want to fly the pig between the chimneys. This was his idea. So that afternoon we went there, we looked, we made a recce. It was a dump, I mean really a dump. And I knocked on the door and a man asked, I said, I want to fly a pig here on Saturday. He said, okay, £500. There was no health and safety, nothing. It was extraordinary, and we did, and it's become probably one of the most iconic landmarks in London because of that.
Un'idea di Roger Waters di far volare un maiale, un gigantesco pallone gonfiato a forma di maiale in mezzo alle 2 ciminee di Battersea Park. Questa è la vecchia è la vecchia centrale elettrica di Londra, che adesso è in disuso. Sono andati lì, gli hanno chiesto permesso, gli hanno dato 500 sterline, li hanno fatti volare. Il maiale in americano vuol dire, è la maniera in cui si dice in slang, si chiamano i poliziotti, quindi c'era un'idea antagonista anche in questo. Ok, one last thing. I wanted to translate this piece of writing of Storm because I think it captures very well the work that you've been doing together. I'll read it first in Italian, then I'll try to translate it in English accordingly. Andiamo alla ricerca. Questo è il libro, come vi dicevo prima, il libro che ha scritto Storm prima di morire, quindi una ventina di anni fa ormai, e che racconta tutta la loro avventura together. Were you good friends? Or did you argue a lot?
We argued all the time, but we were like brothers. We were platonic lovers. We loved each other. Really loved each other as brothers. But like brothers, we were always fighting.
Sì. Ok, no, gli ho chiesto se andavano d'accordo o no, ho detto no, litigavamo sempre, ma ci amavamo come si possono amare due fratelli. Andiamo alla ricerca dei significati più profondi e cerchiamo di cogliere il quadro d'insieme, non perché ci venga naturale essere così analitici, ma solo perché come designer abbiamo bisogno di relazionarci all'intera gamma di emozioni che un disco rappresenta. La copertina consiste di solito in una singola idea grafica o in una fotografia, intesa a rappresentare tutti i 40 minuti di una creazione che ha richiesto enorme fatica, talento e impegno emotivo. Una sola piccola immagine per descrivere tutta quella musica. It's where he talks about the fact that we try to look for the meaning, the most profound meanings, and we try to catch the quadro d'insieme, the idea, the global idea of the music, and we don't do it because we like to be analytic, but we, as designers, we feel like we have to relate with the entire variety of emotions that a record represents. The cover is usually one single idea, but it has to put in a single idea or a photograph 40 minutes of a creation that has required enormous fatigue, talent, and emotional involvement. One only little image to describe all that music. I think that you know, we're very similar to what you were saying before. That sort of sums up the idea. And talking about this, I think I brought it upon because this is the perfect idea. It goes along with what he's saying. One simple idea, in this case, one simple object, like the monolith in 2001, yes, which is carried along, you know, in una sola un piccolo monolite come quello di 2001 Odissea nello spazio, che viene portato all'interno di una famiglia e diventa l'oggetto con cui tutti quanti si relazionano. Well, you want to explain that? Then I have another question.
So Led Zeppelin, working for Led Zeppelin was quite interesting. There was never any music to listen to, no title, no lyrics, nothing. Jimmy Page said, come up with an idea. So Led Zeppelin at this time were the biggest band in the world and very, very powerful, I have to say, in the music industry. So we wanted to think of something that was about power that everybody needs. So first of all we thought of a cocktail party where everybody had a black cat. We thought, no, that's not Led Zeppelin. So then we thought of a black object, like 2001. We were influenced by Arthur C. Clarke. So we made this black object, and I put it in a very simple, normal situation, family at a boat show. And I remember I took the black object to Munich and put it in the middle of the room, and Jimmy Page walked in, I looked at it and he said, I get it, that's Led Zeppelin. We are the most powerful band in the world and everybody needs us.
Noi siamo, allora, volevano, influenzati da 2001 Odissea nello spazio, volevano un oggetto che rappresentasse il potere, visto che i Led Zeppelin in quel momento erano la band più famosa e più potente del mondo. Hanno trovato questo oggetto, l'hanno messo in delle situazioni familiari. Quando poi hanno incontrato a Monaco di Baviera Jimmy Page, l'hanno messo al centro della stanza, lui è entrato, ha guardato l'oggetto, ha detto ho capito, cioè noi rappresenta il nostro potere e il fatto che tutti hanno bisogno di noi. One last thing, I know we could go on forever, but although your work has gone through a lot of phases, if I look at this cover and what you just said, I would say that the essence, the miracle, the real shiny, bright moment is when you find something that synthesizes everything. The synthesis, I would say, that in your work was the center point. Do you agree with that?
Yes, 100%. And I think the Led Zeppelin album cover Presence is absolutely an example of that. It totally was in sync with Led Zeppelin, and the idea was totally representational, symbolic of Led Zeppelin at the time. And what's really interesting to me is Led Zeppelin are basically a heavy rock band, and this has nothing to do with heavy rock at all.
Sì, insomma, perfetta, era d'accordo con me sul fatto che forse l'essenza di base di tutto il loro lavoro e di questo lavoro in particolare è proprio la capacità di sintetizzare in un oggetto, in un'immagine, tutto un mondo, e un mondo che a giudicare dalla copertina non ha assolutamente nulla a che vedere con la band. Io direi di fare un grande applauso a Paul, a Aubrey Powell.
And thank you too.
Thank you very much.
It's been really nice.
Thank you very much for having told us a few secrets that lie behind all these covers, which have become part of your life. So your work has become part of our life, and I think that's something that is not recognized that much for artists of designers, let's say artists for a record company. One thinks Pink Floyd have been part of my life. No, your work has been part of our life. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for coming. Thank you so much.
Radio Medimex, tutto quello che succede mentre succede, da Taranto, da Bari. Radio Medimex è un progetto Puglia Sounds.